Hi, my name is Sam Elliott. My name is Jack Mandeville, and this is Jacked History. Today, we're talking about one of America's most polarizing military leaders, George Armstrong Custer. The name alone has the ability to bring out instant opinions on the man. For some, he was a legend who epitomized the gallantry and grit of the American West. For others, he was a bloodthirsty buffoon who got what was coming to him at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Either way, it should be mentioned that these perceptions of Custer, good or bad, aren't a result of some modern-day revisionist history movement to slander or elevate his reputation. It seems people have strong opinions about Custer because they've always had strong opinions about him. Even in his life and shortly after his death, Custer was a figure who had Americans divided on their perceptions of him.
This man El Guapo is not just famous, he's infamous.
But today, we're not necessarily talking about his biography, although we will be touching on some biographical cliff notes just to set the stage for who he was as a person. There's no shortage of books, articles, documentaries, and YouTube videos you can access about his life if you'd like to learn more about him. And I suggest you do. Today, we're talking about George Armstrong Custer, the fashionista. He was the best-dressed military man in the American West, and arguably the best-dressed American military officer ever. A flamboyant personality who had a flamboyant knack for style, which was an integral part of the legend that grew around him. This week's episode is Jacked History, Fashion Week edition. Because, like we used to say in the Marine Corps, 50% of the battle is how cool you look. All right, let's charge into this story. Is that a bugle? Custer was born in Ohio in 1839 into a family of modest means. As a child, he and his two brothers, Thomas and Boston, were known to be some of the more rambunctious children in the community with a love for practical joking. Spoiler alert, Thomas and Boston served under their brother George at the Battle of Little Bighorn, which means they died there too. Womp womp. Georgie Boy made it out of Ohio in 1857 when he was accepted to the United States Military Academy at West Point. And if you just saw my previous episode on James Longstreet, you'd know that this school historically produced the who's who of big military names in American history. But unlike most of the Civil War's general officers who were much older, there are well-documented photos of Custer while he was attending West Point because photography was in its early days of being readily available to the public. And Custer, as you're about to find out in this video, was a whore for the camera. He never missed an opportunity for some glam shots. What can I say? The dude loved seeing himself. At West Point, Custer built himself up a legendary reputation, not for being a shit-hot student. No, he actually graduated dead last in his class. His rep came from racking up 726 demerits during his time there, a number that still stands as one of the most of any cadet to this day. Simply put, rules in studying weren't really his thing. He came dangerously close to being expelled, but one thing saved him: war. The Civil War, to be exact. Basically, his class was graduated early and pushed out the door to go fill ranks in the new Union Army, but not before he contracted a case of gonorrhea. That's a true story. I couldn't tell if he got gonorrhea at West Point or like when he just got to the Army, not that it matters, he got the gon. And they didn't have penicillin back then, so the treatment was like putting mercury up his urethra and shit like that. Went into a little rant about 19th century gonorrhea cures. And boy, did Lieutenant Custer hit the ground running, showing up to the first Battle of Bull Run and seeing action just weeks after his graduation. And it was off to the races from there regarding his battlefield prowess. The guy straight up didn't give a damn. And while historians and history aficionados still debate his tactical abilities, there's no doubt the guy was a born fighter. He would often disobey orders on the battlefield, charge in front of his own men with reckless abandon, and most of his superiors loved him for it. So much so that at the age of 22 years old, just 2 years into the war, Custer was made a brigadier general in charge of cavalry troops. Not only did he develop quite the reputation as a daring young leader, but it was around this time he started distinguishing himself as one of the best dressed in the ranks. Because war wasn't just about fighting for Custer, it was a theater, and he was the main character. Straight up, his fashion and hygiene routines would put the most histrionic people to shame. First off, he was just a good-looking guy to begin with. At 5 foot 11 inches, which was pretty tall back then, and around 170 pounds when he was healthy, Custer had a rockin' bod. Second, while most senior officers kept their hair relatively short, Custer went well beyond regulation and let that blonde mane of his flow. So much that the press referred to him as the golden-haired boy general. While most of his contemporaries would start their day off with some intelligence briefs and convening with staffers, you might walk into Custer's tent and there would be a good chance you'd see him oiling and perfuming his golden hair to give it the right look before the day began. That routine would end with him placing an obnoxiously large soft-brimmed slouch hat on the top of his head. When it was time to put his jacket on, he wore a custom-tailored, tight-fitting velvet shell jacket to accentuate his frame. A loose-fitting, bright red or yellow silk scarf would be tied around his neck to make his Union blue uniform pop on the battlefield. Because how are your troops or enemies supposed to see you if you're not the best-looking peacock out there, right? A pair of white or tan kid gloves that came halfway up his forearm would also make the uniform pop, especially if he needed to reach for his ivory revolver with his initials engraved on it. And to top it all off would be a high pair of perfectly polished black riding boots. He was, of course, a cavalryman, a 19th century American knight. And like the knights of the medieval age, your worth on the battlefield was how people saw your armor, just as much as it was how you fought. But, in my opinion, the greatest accessory Custer had was his wife. Take a look at her. Look, I'm not trying to break the 10th commandment here, but that's a bona fide 19th century hottie right there. Custer could pull, bruh. He wasn't just a regal cavalry officer. He was a brand. Every part of his image, on and off the battlefield, was carefully engineered to evoke awe from his troops and the public alike. Can you imagine showing up to a meeting of generals where they all show up with their entourage? Some guy named General Abernathy is like, all right, I brought my intelligence officer, a dispatcher, and my aide-de-camp. What about you, Custer? Who'd you bring? Well, I brought my hairstylist, Marguerite. It's not pronounced Margaret, it's Marguerite, okay? Also, this is Esteban. He's my chief tailor. And last, this is my head of PR, Grigori. He used to work for a German prince. Anywho, it was at Gettysburg that he made his greatest mark. On day 3, during Pickett's Charge, which we covered in the previous episode, George Armstrong Custer led his outnumbered cavalry troops in a charge against a numerically superior force of Confederate cavalry commanded by the legendary Jeb Stuart. The fate of the Union victory was on the line as Stuart's troops threatened to sweep through the Union lines defending against Pickett's oncoming men. Custer, like so many other times before, disregarded his own safety, threw off his hat so his men would recognize his long hair, and led the charge into a cavalry-on-cavalry fight that would end up chasing the rebel army off and hence save the Union effort. Less than 2 years later, Custer was in the McLean House at Appomattox when General Robert E. Lee formally signed his surrender. The table used to sign the surrender was purchased by Custer's superior and mentor, General Philip Sheridan, and was given to Custer and his hot wife as a gift for his gallant service. Just days after the war ended, Custer was promoted to Major General at the age of 25. Okay, so the war's over. Hooray! But that means the volunteer military is about to be drastically reduced in size, and the 25-year-old boy general was now reduced to being a lieutenant colonel in the newly formed 7th Cavalry Regiment and sent to the plains to lead troops in escalating Indian conflicts, specifically with the Lakota Sioux, who we covered in a previous episode. And it should be noted that Custer's personality changed around this time. He became a little more combative with both superiors and subordinates, dishing out harsh punishment for seemingly small infractions. Some speculate this was due to his massive loss in rank and responsibility. In this time on the plains, not only did he keep up his MO to always make himself available to a camera and the press, but he got even more stylish, sometimes swapping his personally bedazzled army attire for personally bedazzled buckskin western attire. Was it in army rags? Fuck no! Did he look cool as hell? Oh, you better believe it, partner. And once again, with all the photos and stories coming out, Custer became a living American darling to many Anglo people in the East. He was also constantly pissing off high-ranking officers and even the President of the United States, Ulysses S. Grant, who was also Custer's commanding general during the Civil War. But old Philip Sheridan, who was still running the cavalry in the U.S. Army and was, like I said earlier, a mentor to Custer since the Civil War days, always seemed to go to bat for him. All right, let's do the math on all of this. Custer was young, plus handsome, plus obsessed with taking photos of himself, plus was super into his appearance, plus was always doing wardrobe changes, plus was always getting himself in the news both intentionally or unintentionally, plus carefully engineered his image to a public that either loved or loathed him, plus a smoking hot 10 of a wife. Baby, I don't know how to say it any other way, but George Custer equaled America's first influencer. Also, he was from Ohio, just like these guys. You ever been to a Japanese forest, George? All right, flash forward to June of 1876. Most of us know about the Battle of Little Bighorn. 5 of the 12 companies Custer was commanding were surrounded by a Cheyenne Sioux coalition of thousands after Custer miscalculated their numbers in a previous attack. Every single man under Custer's immediate command was killed, 268 total, including Custer, who was dead at a still young age of 36 years old. It would become known as Custer's Last Stand and would immortalize him in American folklore, regardless of his supposed poor tactical decisions that day. A few things to note before we wrap this up. First, even though Custer was portrayed in popular culture as going out wearing his buckskin jacket, there's no evidence that was the case. It was the dead of summer and he would have been wearing something much lighter. Also, while many folks in the East knew Custer by face and name, that wasn't necessarily the case with the Sioux and Cheyenne who killed him that day. At best, they knew him by reputation, but all accounts of the battle indicate they had no idea they were going up against Custer that day until the battle was over. And as I stated earlier, news of his death was mixed. President Grant himself was quoted as saying, "I regard Custer's massacre as a sacrifice of troops brought on by Custer himself. That was wholly unnecessary. Wholly unnecessary." On the flip side, his supermodel, extremely fuckable wife, Libby Custer, made it her life's work to bolster her late husband's legacy through numerous books and speeches, which seem to have greatly contributed to modern positive perceptions of him. She died at the age of 90 in 1933, having never remarried, stating her only regret was that she never bore a child to carry on his name. Oh man, this lady went almost 60 years not being able to shut the fuck up about how much she loved her dead husband, and some people can't even get through a full shift at their 9 to 5 without their spouse threatening to leave them because they're gone too much. Numerous companies began to make Custer-themed memorabilia around his legend, including alcohol, tobacco, hair products, and toys. Even in death, Custer the influencer was selling products. Okay, so last thing before I go, because I want to make this episode about Custer the media personality and the flamboyantly dressed officer, I simply didn't have a lot of time to focus on so many fascinating and controversial parts of his life. Feel free to fill in some blanks if you have some solid sources of information. Or feel free to argue with people too. Lord knows, what Custer did best was to get people talking about him. Please like, subscribe, hit that notification button, and above all else, please share this episode if it was fun and informational for you. Oh, and Peter? Come oil and perfume my hair, please.
A sweet ghost star lady is feeling all alone. She needs to be taken where the buffalo roam. Her husband gone, a man must step up. Does she like